Nick's great to have you here. Excited to start this Logline workshop with you. I think it's going to help a lot of writers figure out kind of a better way to tell their stories in a really short period of time. So excited to jump in with that. Before we get started, as people are kind of starting to show up, I'd love to hear kind of, the last several months of you editing so many books, so many novels, and also working on your own novel. What are some of the lessons you learned recently you think would help other fiction writers?
Yeah, definitely. Um, well, I guess the biggest one that I've been utilizing with my own writing recently is, and you and I have discussed this before. Basically, when it comes to my own writing, I find a lot of difficulty in setting aside, 2 to 3 hours a day to write, just with all the different things that happens in life, whether it's family, your dog, your kids, um, work, all that good stuff, and the goal, right, is to complete your manuscript as quickly as possible, so that you can, start querying it out to agents and publishers and stuff like that. So what you actually said that I should do, and what I've been doing recently, and what's really been helping, is instead of, taking upon myself to force myself to write for 2 to 3 hours every day, um, I'm doing it in smaller chunks. So I'm setting aside, 15 to 45 minutes a day of time that's devoted specifically to just writing creatively, getting out of, work headspace, and just delving into the world that I'm trying to bring to the page. And so it's really helped me a lot to just sit down and just write for, 30 minutes. I'll wake up with an idea for the scene that I want to write for that particular day. And I might not even get through the whole thing, but just even starting it, and beginning that momentum, it makes it really exciting, and it gets me back into, why I'm writing this book in the first place and why I love it. So yeah, that's something I would really recommend, is if you're having trouble, finding time, either late in the day or early in the day to write for a few hours, just, take that pressure off yourself and just write for 15 or 30 minutes, and see where that gets you. What I've noticed too is that when I start writing, it's kind of hard to stop. So, I'll say I'm only going to write for 30 minutes today, and I'll write for 30 minutes, and the words are just flowing at that point. So I end up writing for, sometimes 2 to 3 hours, those 2 to 3 hours that I wanted to originally allot myself. But I took away that pressure, and now it's, it makes it a lot easier. It's more fluid. It's more fun. So that's one thing that I've learned over the past couple months. Another thing too is that, and this is with the projects that I've been working on, with other authors, is that every single project is going to be a little bit different. In a publisher's mind, like, it's in a perfect world, it'd be great if the editing process was the same, if it was, perfect every time. We could do a dev edit, and 2 weeks later we could do a copy edit, and 3 weeks later we can do a proofread, and then we're ready with a manuscript. But each book, each manuscript has its strengths. Each book or manuscript has its flaws, and so, and each author is different to work with. Some are very extroverted and, extremely hardworking, and will take everything that I offer and just go forth with it. And there's other authors who really enjoy, the way that they've set up a particular scene, and if I have changes on it, they might, come back at me, well, this is why I wrote it this way. Can we find like a middle ground somewhere? So, flexibility has been really key over the past couple of months, and just learning that every author is completely different, um, and to not get, frustrated if it takes a little bit longer to get through, one of the phases of editing, whether it's the dev edit or the copy edit or the proofread. Um, so yeah, those are the two big things that I can think of right now, just off the top of my head. Um, was there anything specifically that you had noticed, in the past few months of us working together?
Yeah, it's great stuff you shared. Things I've noticed. Trying to think what would be valuable for people to or tuning in to listen to. I think, well, so like that last edit I did, the Oathbound book. One of the things I noticed, like there was like 100 some typos when I went through my edit, And to me, that's not that big of a deal. Like 100 typos and 110,000 page manuscript, maybe not that big of a deal. But I do think it's one of the things that kind of was like a yellow flag to me. Like not like a red flag, like, oh my God, we should never work with this person. But it's one of those yellow flags like, oh, maybe this author could have spent more time and effort in this area, right? Um, so one person I learned from a lot named Jim Rohn, he's passed away now. He had all these like kind of motivational videos and books and programs and stuff. And one of the things he said was, if a guy's got high blood pressure, you better check like his weight, you better check like his marriage, you better check like his bank account. Because like if you have one problem and you haven't paid enough attention to it, there's a good chance you've got other problems you haven't paid enough attention to as well. And so that's just something that's been on my mind because I think it's really helpful for a lot of authors who are submitting manuscripts to publishers or trying to get a publishing deal or even working on marketing or something like that. If there's something that you could do to improve your manuscript or to improve your marketing, that's like the first thing you should be focused on, right? Because I think a lot of times what happens is we get so excited about getting the publisher, getting the agent, or getting a new follower on social media that we focus on what we have and we start to forget the little habits that we can do today to move ourselves in the right direction. So similar to what you're saying with like how you're writing every day and how kind of chunking down that instead of saying I'm gonna do 3 hours and 15 minutes, like that little change in your mindset is now making you more productive, right? And I think similarly with your manuscript when someone's going through edits, like spend that extra time to proofread, spend that extra time to find typos, spend that extra time to find any issues. And even in that call with the author, I remember he was saying, oh yeah, like I knew there was an issue with this character, but I didn't know what to do about it, right? And so that's just a sign, like when you notice your own problems in life, whether it's in your career or in your manuscript or something totally different, don't just forget about it. Like write that down. I have a list of issues constantly. Like I always have a list of issues because I don't want to forget about that problem I noticed one day, but I was too busy to work on it that day. I want to come back to it when I've got time to think about it and to think through those issues. And if you do that on a regular basis, you will just continue to get better and better and better and better every day until you're so good people can't ignore you. So that's the biggest thing that I think I recommend people is just if you know there's an issue or if you spend more time in your manuscript, you can make it better, then do it. Because if you're waiting for someone else, like some editor to give you the green light or someone else to say, you're going to be successful, but you're not doing the thing that you could do to move yourself in that direction, then it doesn't matter who your publisher is or whatever, because you've stopped the process of moving forward and making progress. And so if you're just every single day, you're writing for 15 minutes, you're finding typos, you're making things better, then you're making progress. And that's all that matters. That's all you should be focused on. If you do that long enough, eventually you'll get the outcomes that you want in life.
Yep. Yeah. And just to segue off of that and to build upon that a little bit, as an editor myself, and I know that the same is true for other editors that I've talked to, when we're receiving manuscripts, because I get, I don't know, around between 50 and 100 a week. And so that's a lot of manuscripts for one person to look at. So when I'm looking at them, I'm looking for the most perfect, the most polished. You could have a manuscript that comes in where the story is really, really cool. And the first, chapter is great, but then everything after the first chapter is, there's a lot of editing that needs to be done with the manuscript in order to make it perfect. And so that's kind of, again, to your point, that's a yellow flag for us. Cause then it's like, oh, well, this might take months and months and months to make perfect versus, the author that has taken the time and the effort to either find, a freelance editor to look it over once or twice, or has had, beta readers look it over and offer their notes. But yeah, we're looking for really perfect and polished manuscripts. And it does stink when we get those really cool ideas, but the writing isn't quite there yet, because then it's almost an immediate no, So that's another point I would like to make to new authors, especially, go above and beyond to make your manuscript as perfect and as polished as possible when you're submitting, because then it will stand out among the ones that probably aren't, polished as much as they could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say perfect is not the word I would use because I don't think we can ever reach perfection. Like that's always our goal. But it's just, I would say, just try to make it as good as you possibly can so that if you go through another edit today, you're finding like 1 or 2 issues at most. If you're seeing more than that, then you should be continuing to edit until you really can't find any more issues. And
Yeah,
that's at
we
that point
just
when you go to the next stage and where you pay for an editor, or you start pitching agents or publishers, or you go to the next step.
yeah. Yeah, we just signed a contract with a girl in her supernatural fantasy book, hopefully a series, and she actually has gone over it herself about 12 times prior to even submitting it. And it shows, it was one of those books that I just started reading and I couldn't put it down because she had put that time and that effort into, going over it 9 times, 10 times, 11 times, reading it from back to front, moving things around, omitting unnecessary prose on our own time. So that's the kind of author that we like to work with because they're very proactive and they're very on top of their game. And, you could see the passion and you can hear the passion when she speaks about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Well, I know there's a lot of people tuning in now and a lot of people here to learn about logline. So why don't you start us off with, what is a logline and why is it so important?
Cool. Thanks for joining us, guys. I'm Nicholas Holloway. I'm the fiction editor here at TCK. I run the fiction imprint Quilla Books. In previous months, we've done workshops like this where you've been able to kind of see how an editor thinks and how I go about editing actual manuscripts. If you weren't able to join us for those, you can still watch them here on our YouTube page. Lots of fun, very, very educational. And it's really cool as an author to get inside the mind of an editor so that, you can, like I said, you can go back and you can review your own stuff and think like an editor rather than as the author and fix it up. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be focusing on a particular marketing tool that's very, very important, especially for new authors trying to obtain an agent or a publisher, or even garner the interest of a reader. And that tool is called the Logline. If you're a screenwriter, odds are you know what a logline is. They're used a lot in film and TV. And we've been seeing a much higher emergence of loglines being used in publishing in recent years. For those of you who don't know what a logline is, it's essentially a 1-sentence, 2-sentence max synopsis of your manuscript. It's essentially what some people refer to as an elevator pitch, where you can basically, run into an agent or a publisher in an elevator. I mean, that would be great if you could, and pitch your story to them in the time that it takes to go from one floor to the next, right? It's meant to be short. It's meant to be sweet, straight to the point, but it also needs to contain that immense intrigue that will hook that agent or the publisher or the reader into wanting to know more and to wanting to read more. Loglines are great to have at your disposal anytime. I'd recommend when you finalized your logline and made it as good as it can be that you memorize it. You could be at a writer's conference and bump into that one particular agent you've been scoping out for months. I'm speaking from personal experience here. And if you have that tool ready and sharpened, you're going to stand out among the rest of the writers at that conference who might be trying to pitch to that same agent, but they're doing so for 5 minutes or more. Maybe they don't have a clear grasp of what their book is actually about. So having that logline ready to go and sharpened is going to give you that edge. We recently posted a new blog on developing loglines in 5 easy steps. And there's a free template on there that you can use. And if you haven't looked at that blog in detail yet, we're going to go over those steps and that template. And then we'll look at a few of the loglines that you all have submitted and we'll workshop them together. Tom and I do this on a regular basis whenever we're publishing a new book. I'll come to him with the first draft of the logline, and then we'll basically toss it back and forth until we've ironed out all the kinks. And so you'll be able to kind of see how we work, behind the scenes. So I guess first, let's go over the blog together. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Cool. So this is our new blog on how to write a logline for your fiction manuscript. I will say that we will be focusing specifically on fiction today because that's kind of my forte. I know we've had a couple comments about how do we do a nonfiction logline? The idea is basically the same. It's a little bit different with nonfiction. You want to focus on what the reader is going to learn within the scope of your nonfiction narrative. So today we'll focus on fiction. And this is how to write a fiction logline in 5 easy steps. So the first step is to identify your A plot. obviously with books and stories and manuscripts, more often than not, you're going to have multiple storylines, A plots, B plots, C plots. But for the sake of the log line, we want to focus specifically on the A plot, which is the main reason you've written the novel. It's your protagonist trying to successfully achieve something, and the person that's, or the group of people that are getting in their way of achieving that. So the A plot is essentially central to your protagonist, their main goal, and what is hindering them from achieving that goal. Step 2, identify your story's catalyst. So the catalyst basically is that particular moment that begins your book. And it's like, why does your story start on the day that it does? What event happens that launches your story? Screenwriters call it the inciting incident. I like to call it the catalyst because it does launch your protagonist into the main storyline. I will note that the catalyst might be also part of the setting, something that happens prior to the first chapter. Your book might be a dystopian sci-fi and your protagonist's story begins after a nuclear detonation. So in the actual context of the book, there might not even be a chapter about the nuclear detonation. It's already happened, right? But it's thrown the entire world into chaos. And this is, what your protagonist has to go through in order to achieve their goal. So in this case, nuclear detonation is the catalyst. Like I said, we might see it in the first few chapters, or it might have happened before your book even begins. Step 3 is to identify your protagonist, which is your main character, and what makes them unique. For the sake of the logline in general, I would advise not naming the protagonist because a name is just a name. We want to know who your protagonist is and what makes them unique in, 2 or 3 words. For example, here, rather than calling your protagonist Harry Potter, you would say a boy wizard. Instead of Michael Corleone, you would say the ambitious son of a mob boss. Instead of Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs, you would say a novice FBI agent, right? So you're identifying who this protagonist is, what makes them tick, and what makes them different from everyone else around them. Step 4, identify your antagonist. Who or what is working against your protagonist's goals, who's standing in their way of succeeding. And then similar to the protagonist, for the sake of the log line, try not to name the antagonist, find a way to describe them uniquely and setting them apart from other characters in the story. So to go back to the Harry Potter reference, rather than calling your antagonist Voldemort, say a dark and dangerous wizard, or the Dark Lord. Instead of Hannibal Lecter, say a conniving cannibal. Instead of Buffalo Bill, say a deranged serial killer. Step 5, final step, identify your book's main conflict. Similar to screenwriting, the main conflict of a book or a manuscript is the protagonist's defining desire or goal clashing with an internal or external obstacle. The main conflict drives the book forward. It drives the story forward. It keeps us intrigued and on the edge of our seats. It's the main question. Will the protagonist succeed in, vanquishing the Dark Lord or, figuring out where Buffalo Bill is hiding? So what must be accomplished for your protagonist to achieve their goal, and what primary obstacle do they have to overcome, and how do they change? And so in identifying, these 5 steps, first your A plot, your catalyst, your protagonist, antagonist, and your main conflict, you can take all of these and blend them together by utilizing this logline template that we use here at TCK Publishing and Quilla Books. And it's basically introduce the catalyst, the protagonist, the antagonist, and the main conflict in one short sentence, end it with a hook to keep the reader wanting to learn more. These elements don't necessarily need to be introduced in a particular order, and we'll go through some examples so you can see what that looks like. This is my favorite book of all time. If you guys haven't read it, highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's called The Shadow of the Wind by the late and great Carlos Ruiz Zafón. And the logline that I put together for this reads as follows. After discovering a bewitching novel in an ancient labyrinth, a young bibliophile must unravel the author's mysterious disappearance before a murderous book collector burns every single copy. And as you can see, I've kind of identified what each one is. So this here is the catalyst. This is what starts the book. This 10-year-old boy is led by his father to this really cool, awesome, kind of labyrinthine library, if you will, in Barcelona, which in itself, Barcelona is a very, very cool setting. It's very gothic, very dark. It's a very old city. So that there's the catalyst there. A young bibliophile, I could say Daniel Semperay, but if I just say Daniel Semperay, we know nothing about him. We don't know his age, or what he likes to do. So in identifying him as a young bibliophile, you can, in your mind's eye, see that, he's a young boy. I don't know, he might be anywhere from 5 to 15, just depending. It doesn't really matter. The age doesn't really matter at this point. And the fact that he's a bibliophile, he loves books. And so that gives him a sense of identity, right? He must unravel the author's mysterious disappearance before a murderous book collector. Again, I could have said, what is his name? I don't think he actually has a name in the book, but instead of using his name, we've called him a murderous book collector. So we can see that he's dangerous, right? Because he's murderous. And he also kind of mimics the protagonist, right? Because the protagonist is a bibliophile. He loves books. The antagonist is a book collector. So that was kind of a cool parallel that the author of Shadow of the Wind used. So he must unravel the author's mysterious disappearance before the murderous book collector burns every single copy. So that's the main conflict. The protagonist wants to, discover what's going on and where this author is, before this book collector basically burns him into non-existence. So that's essentially the logline for Shadow of the Wind. Move into The Stepdaughter by my good friend Georgina Cross. She's a fantastic author. If you guys haven't read this, I highly recommend it as well. When her stepdaughter mysteriously vanishes from the family pool, that's the catalyst. That's what starts the book. A panicky stepmother, so you can get a sense of who she is. We've all heard, I don't have a stepmother, but I've heard of friends who have stepmothers that maybe aren't as close to their kids as they wish they could be. And so that's kind of what Georgina has done with this protagonist. She's very panicky. She maybe isn't the greatest stepmother, but she's trying. Must discover what happened to the girl before her vindictive husband decides she is the one to blame and destroys her life. So here, the vindictive husband obviously is the antagonist. Starts blaming the stepmother for the daughter's disappearance. And basically, it's just unraveling the mystery of that. And the hook here is, destroys her life. We feel for this poor stepmother. So how does she go about the book and discovering what happened to her stepdaughter in order to basically save her own life? Move into The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I think we've all either read this book or we've seen the movies. And this is a great example of taking all these 4 elements and kind of moving them around and introducing them in a different order. So in a future North America, a cruel and manipulative dictator, I can't speak today, maintains control through an annual televised survival competition pitting young people against one another. And a teenage archer's skills are put to the ultimate test when she voluntarily takes her younger sister's place. So in the previous examples, we saw the catalyst right at the beginning. In this example, the catalyst is at the very end, just because we've moved things around. And that almost actually becomes the hook of it, right? Because we've already established that there's this dictator that loves watching kids kill each other. And so we have, this young teenage archer, and she's thrown into the crosshairs of it by taking the place of her sister. This really gives us a sense of who she is. She's selfless. She is potentially battle hardened. She's an archer. So we get a real clear sense of who this protagonist is, you know, what the main conflict is in this story. You know, she has to fight all these other kids in order to, one, survive, and two, to hopefully break the hierarchy of this future, dystopia. Cool. Move on to one of my favorites, The Shining by Stephen King. When a family heads to an isolated hotel for the winter, that's the catalyst. That's what starts the book. A ghostly and sinister presence, antagonist, influences a loving father, protagonist, into violence, while his psychic son sees horrific visions from both past and future that forebode the family may not make it out alive. So that's the hook, and it's also the main conflict. Will they survive this winter in this, abandoned hotel with all these ghosts inside of it? Here's a pro tip here that we like to play with here at TCK. Try utilizing wordplay to tie the log line back to the title of the book. This is a book that we released back in February, I believe. It's called Dr. Glass. It's a psychological thriller. And in the log line, we've actually utilized the word shattered to go along with, the word glass in Dr. Glass. So after a woman kills her baby and herself, that's the catalyst, a psychotherapist finds herself at the mercy of the grieving husband and must find a way to escape him before her career and her life are shattered to pieces. So obviously here we have the psychotherapist is the protagonist. The grieving husband is the antagonist. He basically abducts her. And it's like this psychological game of cat and mouse, where he's basically trying to destroy every piece of her, and she has to make it out alive. Final note, sometimes certain elements of the log line may fuse together. It just really depends on, the book and what the story is about. And this is another book that we just released in June, I Let You Fall. It's a romantic drama by Sarah Downing. It's really fabulous. It's about, a woman that falls into a coma and she meets a man who's in a coma, and they have to basically figure out how to get out of their comas while simultaneously falling in love with each other. So the log line that we put together for this one: when a selfless art teacher falls into a coma, she meets a man who makes her realize death could be more romantic than life. So in this example, we basically fused the catalyst, the antagonist, and the main conflict all into one thing, which is the coma, right? The coma, her falling into the coma starts the book. The coma sort of acts as the antagonist because she can't communicate with any of her family or her friends. She can see them, but they can't see her. And so in a way, the coma is keeping her from getting out of the coma in itself, if that makes sense. And it's the main conflict, right? It's the question, will she find her way out of this coma at some point in the book? So yeah, it's very, log lines can be unique as the book itself, but as long as you have that element that keeps the reader wanting to learn more, then you're solid. So you guys went ahead and shared some of your log lines with us, and so what we're going to do now is go over those, just go over a few of them. I don't know that we have time for all of them, but we've put together a collection of maybe 5 to 6, I think, that really stood out to us, and a couple that maybe need a little bit more work, and that's totally normal. Actually,
I just want to share before we get into kind of taking other people's work and kind of giving our own ideas. First of all, these are just our ideas. We're not perfect. We're not, we make mistakes, and these are just ideas and things you can use to improve. But I would say even more importantly is, I think the thing you should take away here is not just taking like, oh, here's what, maybe you submitted and here's what we wrote, and just taking what we wrote and just running with it. I think would be even more important for all of you is to take away the thought process and the process we use to get from that beginning stage to the end stage, and the way that we think about stories and how do you tell the story and what is the conflict and who is the protagonist and antagonist, etc. Taking that thought process, and so that you can learn those skills so you can do this yourself, because at the end of the day, the skill set of, like, we're just writing a sentence here. A logline is just one sentence, right? But the thought process that you use to write that one sentence and how you tell that story will not just help you write better log lines and better query letters and better pitches, but help you write better stories in general and help you communicate those stories better when you're marketing, whether that's to an agent or publisher or reader or anyone else. So I just want to share that pay really close attention to how we're thinking about these log lines, how we're thinking about communication here, how we're thinking about the stories, because it's that kind of thought process that if you spend that much energy and time learning that skills and asking those questions, that you'll just become a much better storyteller, and it will serve you throughout your entire career, not just for the purpose of writing one particular log line for one particular book.
Right. Perfect. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen again here. Wanted to share one more quick example of our newest book that's going to be coming out later in the fall. And it's by this man named Marco Cordell, and he's an amazing author. And this is actually a sequel to his first book. So it's interesting to kind of see how you would logline a sequel to a book that already did really well. So after a criminal defense attorney orchestrates the murder of his ex-boss, he feels compelled to defend the convict wrongfully accused of the crime, a convict who once tried to kill him. So here, right, we have the protagonist, the criminal defense attorney. After he orchestrates the murder of his ex-boss, that's basically the catalyst. That's what happened in the first book, and that's what leads us into this sequel. He feels compelled to defend the convict wrongfully accused of the crime. That's the main conflict. Is he going to be able to get this guy off? And then we get a sense of who the actual antagonist is, and that's the convict himself. It's a convict who once tried to kill him. So in this sense, the antagonist also kind of acts as that hook element, right? How are these two men going to interact with each other, considering their past? Cool. So now let's go into a couple of your guys's. We'll start. I wish I had titles for these, but I don't think we asked for titles. So this is basically what you guys, the first aspect of this is what you guys submitted to us. And then I'll kind of scroll down and show you how I've doctored it a little bit. And then I'll bring it to Tom, and Tom can offer, a couple of his comments if he wants. But this is basically, you'll see how we go from, this first draft to something that's maybe a little bit more refined and ready to go. So when a young apprentice trips over a body with an arrow protruding from its chest, he must use his skills to discover the truth before a crazed local frames the natives for the murder and the sheriff puts the noose around his neck. So this actually is not a bad first draft at all. I mean, it's got all the elements in there. It's a little wordy, it's a little long. So basically, and I don't know if this one's missing the hook or not, but we'll kind of look at how I've doctored it a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the questions I asked and just immediately look at this one I asked is why? Like why? And if you ask yourself why, like, why does this matter? Why is this important over and over and over again? You're going to come up with something better, right? So my question here is like, why? Why does it matter that they're framing the natives? Like, why does it matter? So if you just kind of ask those questions, like, why is this important? Why does it matter? Because that's what readers are gonna be thinking too. It'll bring you to those answers that will help you write a better log line and get a better hook.
Yeah. And in this first example as well, there's a lot of different characters that are trying to be introduced here, right? We have the apprentice, we have the body with the arrow, we have a crazed local, we have the natives, and we have a sheriff. So there's a lot of different elements that we're trying to blow into this thing. I personally would say just simplify it, take some things out to make it more focused on this apprentice and what he's got to do in order to, save his own neck. Right.
Yeah. It goes back to like your blog post label, the A plot, like just what is the A plot? It sounds like there's multiple plots, he's trying to portray, or he or she, I'm not sure who, trying to portray in this log line. And if you could focus just on the most important one, I think it'll be more smooth. Yeah.
So the apprentice basically, figuring it out before he's convicted of it. That's the whole A plot. And the crazed loco can play into that. I don't know that. I think maybe the aspect of the natives is maybe like a B plot or something that's going on in the background. So for the sake of the log line, I think we can shave that off. And here you have like, this is the antagonist, but we also have a sheriff. So it's like, is the sheriff the antagonist or is it the crazed local? Obviously he's identified it here. But if that wasn't there, we wouldn't know who the actual antagonist is. So I've gone ahead and just doctored a little bit, offered some notes here. In the original, it says when a young apprentice, I would want it to be a little bit more specific. Is it a carpenter's apprentice? Is it a, to me, this feels like a Western. So I'm going to try to stick with Western. When a bartender's apprentice, when a woodworker's apprentice, I might have said that already. So I would just make this a little bit more specific. So for the sake of this, and I'm probably wrong, but we'll just say when a, we'll say a woodworker. When a woodworker's apprentice discovers a body, is it a man's body? Is it a woman's body? I would, again, be more specific with that. So when a woodworker's apprentice discovers a woman's body with an arrow stuck in her chest, he must use his skills. I would be specific again, what kind of skills are these? Are these tracking skills? Are they weapons analysis skills? For the sake of this, we'll just say his tracking skills to expose the killer before a crazed local. Again, let's be more specific. Is it a crazed farmer, a crazed orthodontist? Could be anything really, right? So let's say a crazed farmer frames him for the murder. So in this particular example, what we were missing is specificity. And I think that plays a lot with, identity, whether it's your protagonist's identity, the body's identity. It's just when people can cling on to something, cling on to an emotion, or, something that makes a protagonist tick or an antagonist tick, that's what makes it more fun. So reworking it, we've come up with when a woodworker's apprentice discovers a woman's body with an arrow stuck in her chest, he must use his tracking skills to expose the killer before a crazed farmer frames him for the murder. So what do you think about that one, Tom?
Yeah, this is really great. A lot of good points here. So the point about tracking skills is really interesting, right? Because I think that's a common kind of mistake that writers make with their heroes or their protagonists, is that they don't really make it clear why that protagonist is the protagonist. So for example, like a common trope with, heroes in fantasy is like there's a prophecy, there's some, like it's a wheel of times that way, there's this prophecy that the dragon will be reborn, and then there's this young guy who's like a teenager who has, magical powers that are like far beyond anyone else's, right? And so he has to face like the dark one, the evil lord, and save the world, right? So it's really clear in that kind of setting with that trope, like, oh, this person was prophesied, they have insane magical powers way beyond everyone else's, so of course he's the hero who's going to save the day. But in a lot of stories that are maybe like this, where they're more dramas or they're more suspense or thrillers or things like that, the question is, why is this person the protagonist? And that's a really important question to answer. So yep. I don't know, are you okay with me sharing an example from your writing recently, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So sure. I know you have like a clumsy serial killer, right? Like that's your protagonist, I suppose, right? I don't know, I'm not sure even if
antagonist.
Protagonist. He's the antagonist. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So but it's interesting because it's like you have to have something about your character that gives them the reason for them being the protagonist, right? Yep. They have to have a skill. They have to have something, because like we're watching, like wanting to cheer on the protagonist, and we have to have a reason to do that, right? And so another common trope, there's a lot of TV series, is like the super nerd, and they use their nerdy skills to like solve some crime or like help people or do something, right? Because in the past, like we thought, oh, nerds are shamed, they're not very good, they're not very, like, they're not important or whatever. And then, as being a nerd became more popular, we started seeing more stories in Hollywood and our culture about nerds using their nerdy skills to do cool things and become heroes, right? Yep. So it's just a really important thing to keep in mind, is that your protagonist has to have a reason to be the protagonist. They have to have a special set of skills that are only unique to them, so only they can be the one to solve the crime or whatever it is that their conflict is. So I think that's, not every story has to be that way, but I think in a story like this, I think you can really improve it when you focus on what is that unique thing about your character that It's like they're the only one who can save the day, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And going back to, tracking skills, right? We're in, like I said, I envision this more as like a Western. Uh, so we have a person who has tracking skills. So it probably wouldn't be a woodworker's apprentice. It might be, a sheriff's apprentice or a horseman's apprentice or something like that. So just make sure that, like, your protagonist and whatever skills they have, they line up together. Cool.
Yeah, it's sometimes it can just be a hobby too. Like they could be like a woodworker, but they could like be a hobbyist,
Sure.
hunter or whatever. There's all
Sure.
kinds of ways you can do it. But yeah, to make it more cohesive, sometimes it's easier to make it a little simpler.
Right. Cool. Well, this one's great. I had a lot of fun with this one. Let's move on to the next one. All right. So this is what we received. After discovering a mythical village on top of a mountain, a misfit farm girl is thrust into a journey to find the one who holds the other half of her soul, so together they can save their land from a growing city of immortals. Again, this logline is not terrible, but again, I think it's a little bit verbose. It's a little wordy. There's a lot of different things going on here. We're discovering a mythical village, and then she's got to find the person who holds the other half of her soul so that they can save their land from a growing city of immortals. My question here is, how does discovering this mythical village on top of the mountain have anything to do with finding the other half of her soul and the growing city of immortals? So I would say, for the sake of this, really try to simplify it a little bit and really focus on that A plot, because here it sounds like we have a B plot in here somewhere, whereas she has to find the girl that holds the other half of her soul, and then there's this is obviously the main conflict here, but it's just I'm a little confused on what exactly the book is about. So I have kind of reworked it a little bit to make it a little bit more cohesive and more focused on the A plot. And again, this might not be how the book is written. This might not be how the story happens, but just for the sake of this exercise, really try to focus in and hone in on that main conflict, that protagonist, what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I wanted to interrupt real quick. That point of
Yep.
the rewrites that we're doing, because we haven't read the book, we don't have the full backdrop of what the book is and what the A plot is. It's like these are just our ideas. But it's another reason why learning the skills is so important, is because when you're plotting your next book or you're thinking about your next book idea, if you can think through these things before you even write the book, you're going to actually end up with a better story, because you're going to be more clear on what the A plot is and why that's so important. And you're going to have the hook kind of built into the story before you even write it. So sometimes it's hard when you just kind of, you didn't plot out your book. We have people what are called pantsers. So you just write the whole book and you didn't really plan it out. And then retroactively going back and trying to figure out, okay, what is the A plot? It's harder to do that because you often have to end up rewriting lots of things. So if you can plan these things ahead of time, it often just makes the writing process a lot easier, and you end up with sometimes a book that needs less revisions.
Correct. Yep. Cool. So I've kind of doctored a little bit. After discovering a mythical village, for the sake of it's cool that the village is on top of a mountain, like I can see that, but I guess for the sake of the logline, we really want to condense it. So I think it's cool just to say, after discovering a mythical village, a misfit farm girl, which I stole definitely from here. I think it's a great way to talk about your protagonist. I can see her immediately. I see a little disheveled little farm girl with determination in her eyes, and maybe she hangs out with a pig and a donkey. I don't know, but she's a misfit farm girl, so I love it. So I kept it. So after discovering a mythical village, a misfit farm girl must unlock the secrets of the village and learn how to vanquish a group of ruthless immortals before they destroy her home and her soul. So, in seeing that this is part of the journey, finding the other person who holds the other half of her soul, we're still mentioning the soul here and, wanting to save it. So this is just a different way of writing that. And I think this actually acts as kind of the hook here, because it's like, if she doesn't, take down these immortals, then she's going to lose everything about her. And the soul is at the core of that. So yeah, and going back to, focusing really on the A plot and, being really honed in on what it is you're actually going to talk about or write about, we've discovered this village. So what are we going to do? We're going to unlock the secrets of this village in order to learn how to vanquish these ruthless immortals before they destroy everything that she knows and loves, right? What do you think about this one, Tom?
Love your changes. I love like the kind of hook at the end, like learn to vanquish the immortals before they destroy her home and her soul. I think that's a really great hook. I would probably even simplify this even more. I would
Yep.
probably change the group of ruthless immortals to just the ruthless immortals or something like that, because you don't need those extra words there.
Right.
And then I might even change the first phrase, like after discovering a mythical village, maybe just remove that because you already mentioned the village again. So you're kind of repeating words there. So you can just say a misfit fallen girl must unlock the secrets of a mythical village
Right.
and
That's a good
learn
way to look
how
at
to
it.
vanquish the ruthless immortals. So then you just end up having less words, and the less words you use, if you're still communicating the same information, then it's generally just going to be a better log line and a better
Yep.
pitch because, like Mark Twain, I think it was Sam or maybe someone else said, if I had more time, I'd write a shorter letter. And it's like if you're in an elevator pitch, if someone uses 500 words to tell their story, and someone does the same thing in 20 words, you're gonna like in a conversation, you're gonna understand the person who uses 20 words so much easier, so much faster. And it's the similar with your writing. So if you can communicate the same thing in less words, just be ruthless with that, and because it's gonna make the agent or the publisher or the reader just understand you faster and easier.
Yep.
Because the more time it takes them, the more likely they are to get confused, and the more likely they are to get confused, the more likely they are to say, "Well, I'm just going to go read something that's more interesting."
Right.
Right. So yeah, so I know you're just quickly kind of going through these, Nick. So I don't mean to pick on you whatsoever, but it's just a great lesson for all of us to be like, you know, when you're the author doing this, like you should be spending lots of time on this, like, and be ruthless with like, do I need this word? Do I need that word? How can I make this, even shorter and better? Because if you can say the same thing in less words, you're going to get a better result.
Yeah. And going back to my earlier point, memorize these, and it's much easier to memorize a shorter sentence than a longer sentence, right? Because you could have something like this and then have it in your mind, but then you start talking to an agent and you start getting the willies and stuff like that, and you might miss one part of it or another. But the shorter that it is, the easier it is to memorize, right? And the easier it is to just bounce it right off of that person and get them intrigued with it.
Yeah. And the other point I would make on this one is it's just so good is like that hook is so good because it's the conflict, right? The conflict
Yep.
is these immortals can destroy her soul and her home. And I think that's really important too, to make sure you focus on that. Not every book, again, it's not gonna make sense for every book, but if you can, to focus on what the conflict is and have that be an interesting hook.
Yeah.
Because if you have that and like the way the words you chose here are just fantastic at doing that, it's like I want to read that. It's
Yep.
just if I saw that on Netflix, like that was the description on Netflix, I'd go watch that series right now. It just sounds
Yes.
cool.
That's what we want with a log
That's
line.
exactly what you want, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, so the effort you put into sharing the conflict in that way is going to pay off big.
Yeah. And a great note about removing that initial, after finding a mythical village, because you can do that. This is the mythical village that we're talking about here. So she's got to unlock the secrets of that mythical village. She doesn't have to, we don't have to start the log line with her finding it. It's maybe she's already found it.
Yeah, and well, another point too, like you have this template. We wrote the book with the template. The template's amazing, but it's like a starting point. You don't have
Sure.
to follow it exactly, and so sometimes you do end up combining things here or there to cut words or to make it smoother.
Right.
So it's great to have those tools, as a thought process, but don't be stuck to your tools. Like there really aren't rules for this.
Yep.
It's just find whatever works for you and continue to work on that.
Yep. Cool. Well, this next example is very simplistic, and I wanted to, I think it's a good starting point, and we're going to read through the actual synopsis as well. But Detective Reynolds is in a supernatural chase with an organ-removing serial killer who can stop time. I love it. I love the idea of it, but it's missing a lot of elements, right? And so what we'll do is we'll read through what the actual book is about, and then we'll look at what I've come up with for it. So years ago in a town, two childhood friends were experimenting in a school lab when there was an explosion that knocked them unconscious. 16 years later, Daniel and Amber, the two childhood friends, had become lovers while still pursuing different things. One rainy night through the town, One rainy night, though, the town is suddenly turned upside down when someone is murdered. The victim's place is set on fire, and a note is left next to the body. Amber, being a news reporter, is first on the scene, then Detective Reynolds. No sooner than the first killing, many more killings take place, and each murder more gruesome than the first. Soon it becomes a game of cat and mouse as the serial killer continues to kill more and more people. Reynolds is puzzled and frustrated. What he doesn't understand is why aren't neighbors being alerted to any noise and why there hasn't been any witnesses hearing screaming. What Reynolds doesn't realize is that the serial killer can stop time. So now it becomes a game of cat and mouse where Reynolds is literally running out of time and he doesn't know how until an unsuspecting ally comes on board. We'll skip ahead a little bit. Can the serial killer make good on their promise of getting revenge, or will they be stopped just like time? So what really intrigued me about this one is the actual serial killer, right? I've never seen a serial killer who can stop time. And that just makes my mind go crazy with like, well, how is someone going to stop a serial killer who can stop time? This sounds very interesting. So in this sense, this is a great hook. A serial killer who can stop time. That's a great hook. But I know nothing about Detective Reynolds. The supernatural chase is kind of the main conflict. So we're just going to play with it a little bit. And let's talk about the catalyst a little bit, especially with serial killer books. Like every serial killer has a certain MO. So for example, the one that I'm writing right now, my serial killer lulls people into a sense of safety, and then he feeds them a ketamine concoction that makes them pass out, and then he actually suffocates them with duct tape. So that's how he kills people. So I kind of want to know, there's a body, right? And it says it's burned. So maybe I can update this a little bit, but, make it specific. When a body is discovered with half of its organs removed, or when a charred body is discovered with half of its organs removed, there's something to that detail, be specific about the crime. A pessimistic detective is thrusted into a supernatural game of cat and mouse with a serial killer who can stop time. So for me, we have this really cool catalyst where we're actually seeing the crime and it's very visual. Again, this might not be how it is in the actual book, but just for the sake of this exercise, make it exciting, make it pull me in by like showing me visually this like gruesome murder, right? And then for the sake of this, instead of calling him Detective Reynolds, from this description, I kind of get the sense that maybe he's pessimistic or maybe he's down and out on life. So, just call him either a pessimistic detective or, a down and out detective or something to that effect. Like give him some sort of identity. He's thrusted into a supernatural game of cat and mouse, which to me is the main conflict, with a serial killer who can stop time. The serial killer obviously is the antagonist, and the bit about stopping time, to me, that's the hook, right? Any thoughts on this, Tom?
I mean, the logline is fantastic that you reworked. I really, really like it. I think that does sound like a really cool story. This is a very interesting hook. It's a very interesting kind of serial killer could stop time. Very interesting kind of concept. My only feedback really would be more with just the description. I know we're not talking about description specifically today, but I found the description to be a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
And I would probably break it down into separate paragraphs, so it's like a little more spacing in there. And, there's a lot, like the same thing with the last logline of like, simplifying the words. And here I would cut out a lot of these extra words in here.
Sure.
Also in terms of A plot, B plot, C plot, etc. Like for description, you don't necessarily have to only focus on the A plot, but I kind of, after reading, I'm like, who is Daniel Amber? Like, is Daniel one of the detectives, or so it's a little bit confusing with the different characters in the description itself. But in terms of the log line, I mean, I think you did great with it. I think the original log line, I agree, was like it's missing some of those elements, and you can just kind of tell, like, if that was the elevator pitch, you'd be like, well, it's cool, but it's not as cool as the rewritten one. So
you'd be really focused on that serial killer, but you'd be like, I know nothing about the protagonist. Tell me more about him. And then it turns from an elevator pitch into like a discussion, right?
Right. Yeah, totally. Cool. But this is also a good example of like the initial log line is, even though like, I think your version is significantly improved with all those other things, like it still works pretty decently.
Yep.
as a log line, and that's because it is such kind of a unique story.
Right.
Like, so this is kind of this thing in Hollywood they talk about like high concept and low concept. So it's kind of like a high concept story. It's like, it's how do you describe that? It's just like you can like it would fit like a big Hollywood budget movie, right? Like a big budget Hollywood movie. It would fit like one of those kind of popular superhero movies or something like that, right?
Yep.
So whereas sometimes you might have a story that's more like women's fiction, it's more like drama or family drama with where like it's like the stakes aren't quite as high. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
It's more of
It's like
yeah.
it's more about like the characters and the character development and the character arc rather than the plot. So like this one has obviously a really strong plot, at least in concept, right? And so, but my advice to people who have like that kind of a high concept plot is like really unique and really cool is
Yep.
don't just rely on that alone. If you add these skills on top of that, you will just do so much better. So the initial log line, it works. I think you could get away with it, but when you put in that extra effort to really hone it, like as Nick has done, I think you're going to just get much better results. Um, and that's an interesting thing too, Nick, because like if you were to pitch someone on the initial log line, they would all probably say, "Oh, that sounds pretty cool. Well, tell me more about that," right? Like it's still like because the story is interesting and unique enough in itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's an example of like if you just got feedback from people on the street, they might just tell you, "Oh, you're doing great. Don't worry about it." Um, but even in that case, it can still be improved dramatically. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And, to that point, you have to understand that agents and publishers, they're receiving dozens of log lines every week. If it's a big publisher, they're receiving hundreds, maybe thousands a week. So it's all about making yours better than everyone else's, if that makes sense. So you can have one that works for normal readers, but in order to secure a contract with a publisher, you really want it to look as good as it can.
Definitely. And it's also with agents and publishers, like they and Hollywood too, like, everyone's got their own kind of idea of what they're looking for. So they might be looking for like a strong protagonist or, a high concept thriller or, a supernatural or whatever, right? So the logline that Nick wrote, it has more of those elements in it. And so it gives those agents or publishers more of an opportunity to say, yes, that's what I'm looking for. Whereas if you only focus on the first one, is basically just the detective and the serial killer who can stop time. It doesn't have those other elements. So you're kind of missing some opportunities there to communicate more about the story.
Right. Cool. Well, I think we have 8 minutes left. Do you want to do one more real quick, or do you want to open it up for questions?
Yeah, let's do one more real quick and then go to
Okay.
questions.
So this one I thought we could do together. I haven't put anything together just yet, just because I thought it'd be fun for people to see how we work together. So we'll do this one-on-one like a team. So when a reclusive billionaire is sued by his lying ex-GF girlfriend for cruelty and emotional abuse, he has to rely on something he usually shuns: PR, public relations, and worse still, an annoying but cute social media expert to save his company and his reputation. So again, this log line is not terrible. It's got pretty much all of the elements here. I love reclusive billionaire. I think that's a great way to describe him. I can see him already just, in the shadows of his gigantic mansion, surrounded by all of his gold and suits and stuff. So I definitely keep that.
I would actually tweak that. Like, I do like it too, but
Yep.
it's like, is he like Warren Buffett or is he like, really young? So I'm kind of wondering like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also, is he like reclusive because he's just like old, or is he reclusive because he's like super nerdy? So I think I want one or two more words there too,
Sure.
to just kind of get a more clear picture in my head of who this person is, because it seems to me like he's probably going to fall in love with a social media expert, and maybe there's some
Yep.
romantic stuff in there, and I'm guessing. So just having a little bit, especially if you're going to have like the kind of romance element in something, like you want to be able to visualize who is this character
Yep.
in a little more detail.
Yeah. And I agree. I think this reads a lot like something you would find in the romance genre. So you might even do something like when a handsome yet reclusive billionaire, right? So you get a sense that he maybe is younger. He's kind of the star of the book. And it's kind of he's handsome yet he's reclusive. So it gives you a little bit more about who this person actually is.
Yeah.
All right, cool. When he's sued by his lying ex-girlfriend, I think you could just say when he's sued by,
Sued by his ex. You just say
yeah,
that for less words.
or cruelty and emotional abuse. Um, I would maybe just pick one. I think cruelty is, or what do you
I
think?
don't know if that's illegal. I would say emotional abuse because I'm pretty sure it's a legal term. I don't know. I have to research it. I don't know if
Or
cruelty
maybe,
is a legal term. I'm not sure.
I guess
Um,
cruelty would maybe be physical abuse.
yeah, I would pick
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
Maybe you could do both. Depends on how many words are in the rest of the log line.
Yeah. We'll start with both. And then if it turns out to be too long, we'll shave it down. He has to rely on something he usually shuns. I think he could maybe omit that or find a different way to say it. So like he
Well, since
must.
you already said he's reclusive, like he maybe has to step into the limelight or something.
Yep.
Like he has to, yeah, because he's like he's fighting against his weaknesses or his fears, right?
Yeah. And then obviously this is a romance too. So we maybe want to talk about the social media expert. Must
I
step
would
into the
probably,
limelight.
for
Go ahead.
now, I would say he must step into the limelight to save his company's reputation. I think that's good, and then see if there's anything missing that you need.
Do you think his reputation is more rather than his company's reputation? Because I feel like on a human level, we want to save ourselves even over our company, you know?
I like the initial one, his company and his reputation, because it's like both.
Yeah.
Because if it's
Just
just reputation, it's like, oh, he's just an egotistical jerk. But if it's like his company, well,
right.
he has something that's about people's jobs and,
Sure.
whole impact thing too. So
Raises the stakes a little bit.
yeah.
Cool. So it's not just
And it
about
gives
his
you a
life.
sense of
Now
like
it's
his
about
character. Because again, if you said just his reputation, then maybe I think it's just an egotistical douche, and maybe
that
he
is
should
true.
lose everything.
That
So
is
it just
true.
depends kind of what you're going for there. Like, do you want us to, root for this guy more and like be really I'm assuming he's the protagonist based on this, but depends how much you want to root for him and what his personality is in the book. Like, because a very typical trope for billionaires is that they're just egotistical jerks, right? And I don't know if
Yeah.
that's what they're going for here. It doesn't seem like they are.
Yep.
I could be wrong.
So then let's look at all the elements here. So we have the protagonist here. We have, he's sued by his ex for physical and emotional abuse. That's basically the catalyst. That's where we start the book. His ex, obviously, is the antagonist. I think I would maybe want a little bit more on the ex. Up here it says she's a lying ex. I would try to find a way to say that a little bit different.
Yeah, the word lying is not really descriptive enough.
No,
I
but if
might
she's
say
a
like
yeah, she's like a
crazy, or that's not even a great word either.
yeah,
Something more descriptive than that.
yeah, something
Um,
here.
Vindictive. I don't know.
Vindictive. Yeah, that's a good one.
Jealous. I don't know. Something.
Yeah, I like vindictive a lot.
Yeah. But again, it's like we don't know the story here, so like we don't have
Sure.
the context to like just find the right word.
Yep.
Um,
So then we've turned this into when a handsome yet reclusive billionaire is sued by his vindictive ex for physical and emotional abuse, he must step into the limelight to save his company and his reputation. I think it's solid. Is
yeah.
there anything else you would add to that? Maybe I know that you like to add like before the world before the world burns.
Yeah, I'm a little wondering like, yeah, is there a way we can make the stakes even more? But
Yeah.
well, because I'm kind of wondering like, why would his company be like, is he going to lose his whole company over this thing? I don't know. Um, I'm also just wondering because like again, I don't have the backdrop for the story, so I don't know like how it's going to play out in the story. I'm wondering if it's kind of like a legal thriller almost, where like maybe they're going to be in court and it's just like the whole battle and like, or is it? Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering what that context for the story is, because that could change kind of how you might want to tweak this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's
in terms
hard
of like
because
what we have now, based on what we know, I mean, I think this is a pretty good start for sure.
yeah. There's a lot on PR and social media and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
stepping into the limelight, I think really helps with that because maybe he has to go on, Nancy Grace and she's got to rail him into the ground, or whatever. So
Yeah,
I think
and
that kind of,
maybe instead of stepping in the limelight could be, he must like respond to millions of trolls on social media or, whatever.
sure.
Um, yeah, so there could be some opportunities there to make that a little more compelling.
Yeah. Cool.
And I think that's an interesting thing. So, we talked before, Nick, about like, tropes and archetypes, right? And how stories we're telling the same stories today we were 1,000 years ago. The difference is that our culture has changed so much, right? And so social media is one of those things that's like so prominent in our culture now that wasn't, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Um, so I think that's cool to have more stories with those elements in there because it does play such a big role in people's lives nowadays. So
Yeah.
I do recommend whenever you can, when you're telling a story, to bring in something current in our world that is kind of new or popular in our culture, because that gives you the opportunity as a writer to, first of all, attract other people, to attract more readers who are interested in that topic, but also to like share your opinions and your viewpoints and your kind of message in a way that's not preachy, but just told through the story.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes modern writers and artists and creative people so important in our culture, is that you can talk about the culture through your writing. And even though maybe this is just a billionaire romance, or maybe it's just a legal thriller, or whatever genre this is, I think it's just commercial fiction or whatever, but you can still have a big impact on how readers see the world and on our culture in general through your work. So I think that's really cool to see that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for me, with the book I'm writing now, I mentioned a little bit about the serial killer, and he's clumsy and stuff like that. But he utilizes social media to like showcase his work. So that's kind of I'm on that train. Be culturally relevant. It's kind of hard sometimes, especially with like historical fiction. And I think that's why I don't write anything that isn't that far in the past, because I wasn't alive then. Like I know the world today. I know what social media is like, and I know that it's very, focused on vanity and stuff like that. So I can utilize those actual themes within the context of the book, because I know this world. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many things going on in our culture that, are constantly changing and evolving, and so many trends. So, I mean, things like feminism has been a huge trend in the last 50 plus years, right? And so nowadays, like if you have only female characters who are like boring and one-sided and do whatever they're told and super submissive, it's like you're
it's
just
not
not
going to
gonna
work.
get, like, no one even wants to hear those stories anymore. Even like people who aren't woke or feminist are still gonna be probably more bored by those stories in most cases, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just not the way our culture works these days.
Yeah.
So even if you're not directly referencing something in our culture, you should still kind of be aware of the culture that we live in. And um, even if it's, a fantasy novel in some different world, you can still have, more active female characters, for example.
Right.
So, I mean, that's what the beauty of art is, like that we're commenting on the world we live in, and we're showing new perspectives of the world we live in, so that we can all kind of learn to deal with this crazy social media thing, for example. Like this didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. Like there wasn't two dudes sitting in their offices at home talking to thousands of people on the internet. Like that's just a totally new thing.
Yeah.
And we still are like humans. Like we don't know. Like I don't know how you have to deal with this. Like how do I? Like I'm gonna go hang up after this call and go, hang out with my girlfriend. Like it's weird. It's weird. It's a weird world we live
Yeah.
in. And I think fiction is what helps us better understand that world. And there's so much great research on that. It's pretty cool. So just major props to everyone out there who's writing, and just keep on writing, because you guys really do make a difference.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, that's all I have in regard to the actual workshop for Loglines. I guess we can open it up for questions if we have any.
Yeah. So someone asked, Atmosphere Heroes 2, can you pay somebody to do this?
You can pay me to do it. No, I'm just
That is an option.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I said at the beginning, I mean, I recommend everyone kind of learn the skills on your own.
Yeah.
Not necessarily on your own, essentially, you can't ask for help, but just practice it and try it and put in the time and effort, because you will get better the more you do it.
Yeah.
And those skills can be transferable, not just for log lines, but for storytelling, plotting, everything you do. And even if you're a nonfiction writer, it's going to be helpful to tell a story, whether it's your own personal story or story of your client or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think that's why we put together this template to begin with. Was first it started just, it helped us, gather our minds around the books that we're publishing. But after doing it a few times, it's like, why don't we share this with authors that, you know, it's a great tool to have, so let's just give it out for free. So really, take it and run with it and play with it, and, shop your log lines to your loved ones, to people on the street, maybe not people on the street, but, just other writers. Because as you saw with me and Tom, like the more that you pass it back and forth, and then more if it's like a writer's room, the better it's going to be. You're going to get different perspectives on it, different ideas. Someone might blurt out the word that you've been looking for in order to describe your protagonist, and you're like, yes, there we go. So yeah, shop it around.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's so many writers sharing some really great, words and tips for the things we're working on through here. Like my favorite, Dan's now is actually one of our authors we published. Hey Dan. He said gold digger would be a good word for the woman. So I don't know if that fits the story, but that could be a good one.
Perfect.
So cool. Next question from Lily Sotomayor. Do you have an example of cultural relevance, about being culturally relevant? So, I mean, there's so many. One that comes to my mind is actually Hunger Games from that. That was one of the examples, Nick.
Yeah, let me pull
I
it up.
really loved when I read the Hunger Games at the end of the first book. I'm going to big spoiler alert here. But at the end of the first book, Katniss and I can't remember the other guy, they both survive, and they're at the end, they're supposed to kill each other. And they decide to take like these poisonous berries, and she starts to like eat the berries, and like they stop everything and blah blah. But it was like a very reminiscent to me of Shakespeare, right? Of Romeo and Juliet, where they poison themselves. So it was done tastefully. It was like an homage to Shakespeare. So that's a sense of being culturally relevant to like literature people, right? Because almost everyone who's in literature and loves literature knows that story, and knows that trope, and knows that theme. And so culturally relevant doesn't just have to be what's going on today on the news. It can also be about who are your readers? What are they reading? What do they know? Right. So I think a good way to kind of become more aware of culture is to, read a lot of your genre. That can help to be understanding of like what your readers are already reading. And then like things like, TikTok or YouTube, or like you can just go and you can look up people's favorite books, or people like what people are doing, different hobbies. So like any kind of hobby you have is its own culture. So like I'm really big into foraging. I go out and pick mushrooms and plants in the woods and eat them and make food and stuff, right? So like on TikTok and online, there's all these different groups and of people who do that kind of thing. So if you have like a character in your book who's like a forager, like they said, like a woodworker or a hunter, and you actually dive in, either you are that person, you are a hunter yourself, so you know all about it, or you do lots of research of that culture, then you can add these different little things in your book that only hunters would know, or that people who aren't hunters would learn from, because you're like that character, through what they're doing, is teaching you how to be a better hunter. Like right. Those are the kinds of things that make your stories just so much richer, because it's like culture is in a sense just a bunch of knowledge, right, of experiences and shared knowledge that we have that we pass on. So if you have a family drama where you have a hunter character and he teaches us how to hunt, and so even though I've never hunted in my life, I have no interest in hunting, there's whatever, I can still learn about hunting through that character. Like that's sharing culture in a really cool way. So there's unlimited ways to do it, because there's so many different cultures and so much knowledge that human beings have. But it's just kind of, I mean, it's hard to explain how to do it. It's just like, I think it's just thinking through and really caring about your characters and caring about your story you're telling, and trying to do it in a way that that resonates with readers, right? Because like, for example, if you have a hunter character and you have a scene where he's like butchering an animal and he does it all wrong, every hunter who reads this can be like, who is this author? This idiot wrote about, that's not how you butcher an animal. What are you talking about, right? So it's like things like that when you're writing a story might not seem like that big of a deal to someone who's like super passionate about hunting. That's a big deal to them, right? So it's kind of like sharing that knowledge and that passion in a way through your writing by doing the research and really caring about it. And just paying attention to every little thing that you put in your book, and making sure that it's true in the sense that it's accurate to reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And just on a, personal example of that, um, is TikTok. I avoid TikTok like the plague, but my wife is on it like 5 hours out of her day, just swiping through things. And in my book, it's a serial killer that kind of focuses on social media influencers. Nobody steal that, by the way. It's copywritten. Um, but yeah, basically, with each killing, we are in his point of view, and so we're seeing what he's doing. But each of the social media girls that he kills, they are influencers for a different reason. So the first one is like a clothing influencer. The second one is a makeup influencer. The third one, and I actually saw this online, which is, I thought it was so cool. And then I put it in my book. And it was basically this person who had a virtual reality thing on, and he had his little toggles, and he was painting or spray painting, and you could see on his TV screen what he was painting, and it was an incredible like Spider-Man mural or something like that. And so I was like, that is so cool. I want to put that in my book. And so one of the killings that happens in my book, he's hiding in this woman's closet, and he's watching her, painting her next masterpiece on this VR set. So it's just, that is culturally relevant, right? That's stuff that is actually happening because we're seeing it on social media. Um, so that's just a personal example of mine.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it just goes to show, like, if it's anything you're interested in, other people are interested in it too. And so when you share that passion, that knowledge that you're writing through your characters, through what you're creating, it resonates with people. Awesome. Well, I think that's all we have for questions right now, and really appreciate everyone for showing up. And like I said, keep on writing. You guys make a difference. And big thank you to you, Nick, for all the effort and you put into this and helping people improve their log lines. Thank you so much.
Anytime, guys. Yeah, my job here is to just help you guys be better writers. That's why I got into this business. I love working with authors, and you guys are great, and you submit so much cool stuff. And I wish we could publish everybody's, obviously, but that's not the nature of the industry. But yeah, anytime you guys have questions or anything, please leave a comment on our blog or on our YouTube channel. Um, and we'll respond. We will.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day.